Hello there. I want you to imagine being 10 years old in October 1962, sitting in your classroom as the teacher suddenly stops the lesson. Over the announcement system, the principal says that everyone must go home. Immediately. No explanation given. As you walk past neighbors boarding up windows, you see military trucks rolling down your street. One terrifying thought grips you. Are we about to die? This was daily reality for millions of American children during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Schools became ground zero for childhood confusion that October. Familiar routines evaporated overnight. Air raid drills that used to feel like games now had teachers scanning the horizon as you crouched under desks. Those mimeographed civil defense instructions they handed out didn't help. The purple inked sheets showed diagrams of fallout shelters and lists of supplies, though most kids just saw the black and yellow triangles in the corners. Teachers would leave radios playing softly while you worked on spelling tests, the newscaster's voice dropping to a murmur whenever students walked by. Declassified documents show 73% of school districts updated their emergency plans that month. New York schools tried something called sunshine drills, leading classes outside for what they called special recess. You'd stand in neat rows near the baseball field, while teachers counted heads and glanced at their watches. Some kids started calling them bomb drills when the adults weren't listening. No one ever explained why the fire drills changed format. Instead of lining up outside, you'd crouch in the hallway with your head between your knees. The janitor started keeping boxes of saltine crackers and tin cups of water at each station. When you asked why, he'd just say, "emergency supplies," and quickly change the subject. Some teachers tried maintaining normalcy with math races and spelling bees. Others clearly weren't sleeping. You could see the coffee stains on their lesson plans and the way their hands shook when turning textbook pages. A girl in Virginia remembers her teacher suddenly bursting into tears during reading circle, then pretending she'd gotten chalk dust in her eyes. The school nurse's office got busier. Kids complained of stomach aches and headaches that vanished by dismissal time. The nurse would take your temperature, sigh, and send you back to class with an aspirin. Sometimes she'd whisper with the principal about nervous stomachs, while you pretended not to hear. Art class took a strange turn. Instead of finger painting, you'd draw maps of your neighborhood, with fallout shelters marked in red crayon. A boy in Seattle still has his from 3rd grade. Wobbly lines connecting his house to the school basement, labeled "Safe Route" in block letters. The teacher hung it on the bulletin board without comment. Lunchtime felt different too. The lunch ladies started saving empty milk cartons and tin cans, stacking them behind the steam table. When curious kids asked why, they'd say, "for the scrap metal drive," while avoiding eye contact. The usual lunchtime noise gave way to quieter meals, broken by sudden hushes when certain topics came up. Report cards that semester carried new handwritten notes. "Does well under pressure and responds quickly to instructions" appeared, where comments about handwriting or arithmetic used to be. Parents would read these and nod grimly, tucking the cards away without showing you. Attendance became spotty. Some kids stopped coming to school altogether. Their desks would sit empty until a classmate got sent to the office with their books and a note for the secretary. You'd hear fragments about staying with relatives upstate or family trips that no one believed. The school library changed too. Books about World War II disappeared from shelves. The librarian started keeping certain titles behind her desk, only giving them to teachers with a nod. When you tried checking out a book about Hiroshima, she shook her head and suggested The Bobbsey Twins at School instead. Gym class turned into another kind of training. Instead of dodgeball, you'd practice carrying injured classmates on makeshift stretchers made from jump ropes and gym mats. The teacher would time these drills with a stopwatch, calling out, "Faster, faster," as you struggled with the weight. No one explained we were practicing for triage. School assemblies took on a different tone. The principal stopped talking about Pep Week and started showing civil defense films featuring cartoon characters surviving nuclear blasts. Your class would walk back to the room in silence afterward, the projector's click still echoing in the darkened auditorium. The schoolyard became a place for whispered theories. Older kids traded rumors about Russian paratroopers and poison gas. Younger ones made up games where they'd spot enemy planes in the clouds. Teachers broke these up quickly, but the unease lingered like the smell of the disinfectant they used on the lunch tables. Birthday celebrations felt hollow that fall. When cupcakes came out, someone would always joke about last meals until a teacher shut it down. The songs sounded forced, the applause died quickly, and the birthday kid would often just push the treat around their desk until dismissal. School photos from that year show the change. Instead of grinning faces, you see rows of tense children with stiff postures. Many are clutching the small American flags they'd been given for picture day, holding them like talismans. The photographer probably told them to smile, but few managed it for long. Halloween almost didn't happen that year. Some schools cancelled parties, others held subdued events where kids made paper pumpkins instead of wearing costumes. A teacher in Connecticut had her class decorate the room with autumn leaves, then broke down when a child asked if they were camouflage. For many kids, school became something to endure rather than enjoy. The building itself felt different, no longer just a place of learning, but somewhere you might not leave if the sirens went off for real. The pencil shavings and chalk dust smelled the same, but the air carried a new tension you couldn't name. All this happened while the adults pretended everything was normal. Teachers would write multiplication problems on the board with one hand, while adjusting the radio volume with the other. Kids started noticing how often their parents asked, "What did you do in school today?" while studying their faces for signs of fear. Then the final bell would ring, and you'd walk home past new fallout shelter signs popping up on neighborhood basements. The whispering at school was bad enough, but what waited at home would make even less sense. You notice the sudden hush when you push open the kitchen door. The radio that was just blaring news cuts to static as your mum twists the dial. Your dad, normally waiting with his newspaper at breakfast, spends hours murmuring into the phone in the hall closet. Newspapers now disappear when you enter rooms, leaving only coffee cup rings on the table where they'd been spread out moments before. Every adult suddenly spoke in partial sentences that October. Conversations would stop when you walked into rooms, picking up again with forced cheerfulness about the weather. A Nebraska farm boy remembered how his father suddenly made him learn to drive the tractor alone, just in case. The lesson ended with his dad staring at the horizon for a long time without speaking. In Washington, D.C., a girl came downstairs to find her mother sitting surrounded by canned goods in the basement, crying silently while stacking pork and beans. Parents didn't know how much to explain. Some mentioned trouble with Russia without details. Others said nothing at all, thinking silence was protection. Studies later found this approach backfired. Kids sensed the tension but lacked context, making their imaginations run wild. A California boy overheard his parents arguing about whether to paint fallout shelter on the basement door. He spent weeks picturing fallout, as some kind of monster that would seep through the walls. The refrigerator changed first. Normally half empty by Friday, it stayed packed with milk jugs and meat wrapped in white paper. Cans appeared under beds, in closets, lined up along baseboards. Parents would suddenly quiz you on where the flashlights were kept or how to turn off the gas line. In Ohio, a mother started making her children sleep with shoes by their beds in case we have to run. No one said where they might be running to. Adult eyes kept checking the windows. Fathers came home from work early wearing expressions you'd never seen before. Mothers forgot to make dinner, then served weird meals of canned spaghetti and saltines. In Florida, a boy watched his normally calm father pace the backyard every night, staring at the sky while smoking one cigarette after another. The ash would glow in the dark like a tiny warning light. New rituals appeared without explanation. Your dad might test the basement sump pump 3 times a day. Your mum started saving empty jars and tin foil, rolling it into tight balls that piled up under the sink. In Massachusetts, a girl's parents made her practice putting on a gas mask they'd gotten from an army surplus store. The rubber smell made her gag, but they insisted she keep trying until she could do it in under 30 seconds. Bedtimes got strange. Instead of stories, parents would sit on your bed asking odd questions. Did you know where the emergency water was? Could you find your way home if you were at school when it happened? In Texas, a boy's father woke him at 2 a.m. to practice loading supplies into the car silently. They'd whisper count boxes of matches and candles without ever saying why counting in the dark mattered. Church became more crowded that October. Families who used to skip services now sat stiffly in pews every Sunday. A girl in Pennsylvania remembered her father gripping her hand painfully tight during prayers, his palms sweaty despite the cool church air. The minister's sermons changed too. Less about love, more about being ready to meet your maker. Dinners no longer included the radio's usual evening programs. The set would be off, or tuned to static that masked distant stations. Parents developed a habit of glancing at clocks while chewing, as if timing each bite. A Chicago boy recalled his mother bursting into tears when he knocked over a glass of milk, something that normally would have just gotten him a scolding. Visits to relatives became more frequent, but less fun. Instead of playing outside with cousins, you'd find the adults huddled around kitchen tables with maps spread out, measuring distances between cities with pieces of string. In Oregon, a girl noticed her uncle kept staring at her during Sunday dinner, finally blurting out, "You're so young," before walking abruptly out of the room. Mail took on new importance. Parents would snatch letters from the postman before you could see the return addresses. Army envelopes appeared sometimes, making your mother's hands shake as she opened them. A Virginia boy saw his dad burn one such letter in the sink after reading it, watching the ashes swirl down the drain without explanation. Normal punishments vanished. Kids who'd normally get grounded for bad grades suddenly found parents too distracted to check report cards. Bedtimes became flexible, but no one stayed up laughing. You'd lie awake hearing tense murmurs from the living room instead. In Colorado, a boy skipped school for 3 days before his teacher called home, only to have his mother say, "I suppose it doesn't matter right now." Holiday plans changed. October birthdays got quieter parties, if any. Halloween costumes stayed in closets as some towns cancelled trick-or-treating. A Minnesota girl's parents wouldn't let her answer the door to neighbors, peering through curtains first to see who was outside. When she asked why, they just said, "Better safe than sorry," in voices that didn't match the simple phrase. Extended family became a sore subject. Normally, chatty aunts and uncles now gave vague answers about their plans. Phone calls with grandparents ended abruptly when you entered rooms. In New Jersey, a boy overheard his parents arguing about whether to send him to live with relatives in Canada until this blows over. He spent weeks studying maps of Montreal under his blanket with a flashlight. Some kids knew more than others. Military brats recognized the significance of packed duffel bags by front doors. Pastors' kids noticed the extra emergency numbers taped to the church office wall. A Navy officer's daughter in Norfolk saw her mother burn papers in the backyard incinerator every night that October, the ashes floating over the fence like black snow. The silent treatment continued even after Halloween. Parents kept watching the news with that same tense posture, jumping when phones rang. In Indiana, a boy found his father's handwritten list titled, "If We're Separated," tucked in a dresser drawer. It contained instructions like, "Meet at Aunt Ruth's," and "Don't drink tap water for 48 hours," without context. Psychologists would later identify what they called crisis echo in this generation. Adults who still stockpile canned goods or compulsively check emergency supplies decades later. The habits formed in those 13 days never really left them, just like the memory of parents who suddenly seemed like unreliable narrators of their own lives. Kids who lived through it remember imagining everything from alien invasions to biblical plagues, all more terrifying than the actual geopolitical crisis happening over their heads. Meanwhile, yellow and black fallout shelter signs were appearing on buildings across the country, though no one explained what you were supposed to do if you saw one flashing red instead of just sitting there quietly on the basement door. The first sack of rice hits your kitchen floor with a dull thud. Then come the canned goods, peaches, beans, Spam in square tins. Your father wipes his brow and shows you a metal sign with black and yellow triangles. "Just helping a friend with a project," he says. But you later find him in the basement moving boxes to clear space near the foundation wall. Yellow signs start appearing everywhere that October. The library basement gets one, the post office, even Mr. Henderson's barbershop. The triangles remind you of warning labels on bleach bottles, but these are nailed to buildings with serious-looking bolts. You notice parents reading them like secret messages while waiting to pick up kids from school. Civil defense records show a 400% spike in shelter supply sales during those weeks. Hardware stores ran out of water barrels. Grocers stacked canned goods by their front doors with signs reading "Civil Defense Sale." A Boston girl watched her mother buy 3 Geiger counters, insisting they were special radios when asked. Parents' hands shook as they counted out cash for iodine tablets and first aid kits. Some families turned preparations into strange rituals. In Ohio, a boy helped his father build shelving for their basement shelter, while the man hummed "Jesus Loves Me." The tune mixed with the scent of fresh-cut lumber and the sound of distant air raid sirens during tests. Elsewhere, parents conducted odd inspections, testing flashlights nightly, counting water jugs, lining shoes up by the basement door, in case we need to move fast. Kids developed their own theories about the stockpiling. A Texas boy thought the cans lining their basement meant they were getting a bomb shelter dog. He started leaving bits of bologna near the stacks, waiting for a furry companion to appear. Another child in Virginia believed the new basement cabinets held Christmas presents, despite it being October. She'd sneaked down to shake boxes until her father caught her and snapped about leaving supplies alone. Shelters transformed familiar spaces. Your friend's rec room became a storage area for army surplus blankets and drums of water. Some basements got strange additions: chemical toilets tucked behind furnace rooms, stacks of board games with all the pieces counted and bagged. A Chicago family repurposed their wine cellar, replacing Bordeaux with jugs of distilled water labeled in shaky marker. The supplies created new routines. Mothers rotated stock like supermarket managers, making you eat the oldest cans first. Some kids got jobs like testing battery-powered radios weekly or checking expiration dates on medical kits. A girl in Seattle remembered her father timing how fast she could climb down the basement stairs, with your eyes closed, in case it's dark when we need to go. Dinner conversations changed. Instead of discussing your day, parents analyzed how long the stockpile would last. 6 months if we stretch the peas, your dad might say, while passing the meatloaf. Some families practiced eating by candlelight, blowing out the flames after 10 minutes to conserve wax. A boy in Minnesota developed a lasting hatred of powdered milk after his mother served it for 3 straight weeks to test our emergency rations. New words entered your vocabulary. Fallout stopped meaning snow and became something that could get in your bones. You learned about potassium iodide tablets without understanding why someone would eat them. A science-loving kid in Florida excitedly explained radiation to his class after hearing adult conversations. His teacher sent him to the principal for causing panic. Hobbies adapted to the times. Instead of collecting baseball cards, some kids traded civil defense pamphlets. A crafty girl in Oregon made dollhouse furniture from empty Spam cans. Boys who used to play cowboys now dug shelters in backyards, lining the holes with stolen road signs and broken table legs. The signs disturbed school routines. Teachers would pause mid-lesson when sunlight hit one at a certain angle, its yellow paint flashing through classroom windows. During art time, kids drew them over and over, sometimes on house pictures, sometimes hovering like UFOs in crayon skies. A perceptive second grader in Ohio noticed the signs all faced outward and asked if the bombs need to read them too. Odd items appeared in homes. Families who couldn't afford real shelters bought metal signs anyway, nailing them to basement doors as wishful thinking. Some parents purchased radiation suits that hung in hall closets next to winter coats. A California boy found his father's emergency briefcase containing cash, a map, and a revolver. When confronted, the man took to locking his bedroom door. Bedtime stories changed. Instead of fairy tales, some parents read civil defense manuals aloud. A girl in Connecticut remembered her mother showing how to seal windows with duct tape as a fun craft project. Other kids received peculiar gifts, gas mask kits from army surplus stores, or survival comic books where characters outwitted communists between bomb blasts. Neighborhood dynamics shifted. The Joneses got respect for having the deepest basement. Mrs. Wilkins, a retired nurse, became popular for demonstrating first aid techniques. A boy in Maine watched his normally reclusive neighbor invite everyone over to see his new shelter, serving canned peaches on good china like it was a housewarming party. Preparations blurred reality for some children. A devout family in Kansas stored Bibles alongside gas masks, telling their kids, "Jesus wants us to be ready." In Nevada, a girl's parents bought a desert property just in case, taking weekend trips to stock a shack with supplies she wasn't allowed to touch. One boy developed a habit of counting canned goods whenever anxious, a compulsion that lasted into adulthood. The shelters affected holiday plans. Halloween decorations shared space with emergency lanterns. Thanksgiving menus featured practice meal dishes made entirely from stockpiled goods. A Pennsylvania family strung Christmas lights in their basement shelter to make it festive, though the presents that year were practical. New flashlights, wool socks, Swiss Army knives. Psychologists later found kids who participated in preparations often coped better during the crisis, but many developed lasting habits. Some grew into adults who overstocked pantries or obsessively checked emergency exits. A woman who'd been a child in 1962 confessed to keeping her hurricane supplies ready year-round, though she lived in North Dakota. Teachers noticed behavioral changes. Kids incorporated shelters into drawings and stories. A first-grade class in Virginia built a fallout fort from chairs and blankets during recess until the principal intervened. Another teacher found students staging mock drills during free time, complete with imaginary Geiger counters and arguments over who got to play the radiation. The yellow signs lingered after the crisis faded. Paint peeled, bolts rusted, but they remained on buildings like scars, their once bright triangles dimming to the color of old newspaper. Children who passed them on the way to school would touch the metal out of habit, as if checking that the cold surface could still confirm some unspoken fear. Meanwhile, military trucks kept rumbling down Main Street, their cargo hidden under canvas tarps that flapped in the autumn wind, like the unsettled thoughts still swirling through kids' minds. The canned peaches stayed stacked in basements, their syrup growing thicker with each passing year, waiting for a disaster that never quite arrived, but never quite went away either. And those strange drills at school weren't stopping. If anything, they were getting more frequent, with teachers now barking orders instead of giving explanations while you crouched under your desk, knees pressed to cold linoleum, wondering when adults would stop pretending everything was normal. You come home from school to find your father's duffel bag by the front door again, though he just returned from deployment last month. His uniform hangs freshly pressed on the closet door, but he's already gone. Just a note on the fridge saying back soon. Your mother starts jumping every time the phone rings, grabbing it before the second ring. When you ask where Dad went, she just says extra duty and turns up the radio. Military bases changed overnight that October. Checkpoints appeared where there used to be open gates. Members of Parliament started checking IDs twice instead of waving familiar faces through. Kids riding bikes past the airstrip saw armed guards standing near parked jets that normally sat unattended. A Navy brat in Norfolk watched destroyers leave harbour at odd hours, their decks crowded with men instead of the usual skeleton crews. She knew her father's ship wasn't supposed to deploy until Christmas. Pentagon memos from that period instructed officers' families to maintain routine appearances while quietly preparing for separation. Parents followed these orders too well. An Air Force colonel's son in Colorado came home from school to find his mother burning papers in the backyard barrel. When he asked about the smoke, she said it was just old bills, while stirring the ashes with a stick to make sure everything burned. The next morning, his father's dress uniform was gone from the closet. Base housing felt different. Normally, chatty neighbors stopped sharing gossip over fence lines. Curtains stayed drawn even during daytime. Kids playing outside noticed unfamiliar officers coming and going at odd hours, their staff cars idling in driveways for minutes before pulling away. At Guantanamo, children kept playing baseball as Marines dug trenches around the outfield. No one commented on the armed sentries now watching from the newly strung perimeter wire. School became an exercise in secrecy. Teachers knew which kids had parents at Strategic Air Command or the Pentagon, but avoided the subject. A sixth grader at a base school in Virginia remembered spelling tests being interrupted by low-flying reconnaissance planes. The teacher would pause until the noise faded, then continue like nothing happened. When a student asked about the extra flights, she got detention for disrupting class. The phone became enemy number one. Mothers would listen for clicks on the line before speaking. Some families developed code phrases. Aunt Martha isn't well might mean a deployment extension. A girl in San Diego got slapped for answering the ringing phone at dinner, something that had always been her chore before. Afterward, her mother just kept repeating, "You don't know who could be calling," while twisting her apron strings. New rules appeared without explanation. Certain TV channels got banned. Newspapers disappeared before kids could read them. A boy in Kansas saw his mother blacking out paragraphs in Time magazine with a marker before letting him look at the pictures. When he asked why, she said some news wasn't for children and changed the subject to homework. Deployments happened fast. A Navy daughter watched her father pack in 15 minutes flat, stuffing socks around his shaving kit to keep the glass from breaking. He hugged her extra hard at the door, then was gone before she could ask how long this cruise would last. That night, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a map of the Caribbean and a ruler, measuring distances between islands. Kids developed radar for unusual behavior. A major's son in Germany knew something was wrong when his normally strict father let him skip piano practice to go fishing. They sat by the base pond in silence for hours, his dad staring at the water while bombers roared overhead. The fish weren't biting, but neither of them cared. That evening, the man showed his son how to use the combination lock on the basement shelter for the first time. Some parents tried to prepare their kids subtly. A Marine lieutenant's wife in North Carolina started teaching her daughter how to cook simple meals for when mommy gets tired. The lessons included how to light the oven pilot light and where the emergency cash was hidden behind the flour canister. The girl didn't realize it was training until years later when she found the notebook where her mother had calculated how long their supplies would last. Others couldn't hide the tension. An army captain's son in Georgia woke to find his father standing fully dressed at the bedroom window at 3 a.m., binoculars in hand. When asked what he was looking at, the man just pointed northeast toward Washington and said, "Nothing, go back to sleep," in a tone that meant stay quiet. The boy pretended to sleep until dawn, listening to his father's pacing footsteps creak down the hall. Base children grew adept at reading between the lines. A teen at Andrews AFB noticed officers' wives clustering at the commissary, their carts full of odd items, extra batteries, powdered milk, first aid kits. Normally, they'd chat about PTA meetings or recipes. Now they just exchanged tight smiles while stocking up on supplies no one mentioned needing before. The base library changed too. Normally, packed shelves in the history section sat half empty. The books about Cuba and missile development all checked out. A girl trying to do a report on Havana found only a 1954 travel guide left on the shelf. The librarian whispered that maybe she should pick a different country this time. Religious services got heavier attendance but lighter moods. Chapel pews filled with families who normally slept in on Sundays. A chaplain's kid in Oklahoma remembered his father's sermons turning darker. Less about love thy neighbor, more about being ready to meet your maker. After services, adults would cluster around maps someone had tacked to the parish hall bulletin board, talking in low voices while their children pretended not to listen. Some kids cracked under the pressure. A high school sophomore at a naval station got suspended for yelling at a teacher who said Cuba was just a little communist hiccup. Another boy got caught drawing missiles instead of taking algebra notes. His teacher sent him to the counselor with a note about military family stress. The man just asked if his dad was deployed, then sent him back to class without another word. Younger children played unsettling games. A group of first graders at a Texas base turned jump rope into attack drills, falling dramatically when someone shouted, "Incoming!" Kindergarteners built block towers just to knock them down with toy planes. Teachers broke these games up quickly, but couldn't stop the whispered comparisons between Daddy's jet and the ones in newsreels. Mail call became an event. Fathers who normally wrote every week fell silent. Mothers waited eagerly for thin blue envelopes, then disappeared to read them alone. A girl in Maine saw her mother tear open a letter at the mailbox, then sit down right there on the curb crying. Not sad tears, but some emotion the child couldn't name. When she asked if Daddy was coming home, her mom just folded the paper tight and said, "Soon, honey," in a voice that didn't match the words. The pressure seeped into everything. A Navy junior in Florida remembered her normally unflappable mother snapping during dinner when the radio played, "We'll meet again." The woman stood up so fast her chair fell over, turned the set off mid-chorus, then served dessert without another word. That night, the girl heard muffled sobbing through her parents' bedroom door for the first time in her life. Leave got cancelled without notice. A boy counting down the days to his father's homecoming saw the calendar X's stop 2 weeks short. His mother just said, "The Navy needs him more right now," and took down the countdown chart. At bedtime, he heard her on the phone arguing with someone about emergency-dependent pay forms. Kids noticed the extra precautions. A general's daughter in Washington saw armed guards checking IDs at the base theater, something that hadn't happened since World War II. Her ballet recital got moved from the gym to a windowless basement room for acoustics. No one mentioned the new bomb shelter signs pointing the way to that same basement. The base exchange stores sold out of strange items. Cameras disappeared from shelves. Typewriter ribbon inventories vanished. A teenager working after school at the Fort Bragg PX noticed officers buying up all the protractors and map markers. When he asked why, the sergeant just winked and said, "Target practice," though the base shooting range had been closed for weeks. Some families got sudden transfers. A 7th grader came home to find packed suitcases by the door and her mother on the phone saying, "Yes, sir, we'll be at the airport by 1800. They left so fast she didn't get to say goodbye to her teachers. Just a hastily scribbled note dropped at the principal's office as they drove off base for the last time. The changes left marks. A bomber pilot's son in South Dakota started wetting the bed again at age 9. His mother didn't scold him, just changed the sheets each morning without comment. At school, a teacher found him staring out the window during air raid drills instead of crouching like the other kids. When asked why, he said he wanted to see if the planes are ours this time. Military kids developed what psychologists later called hyper-awareness, noticing tiny details as threat indicators. A captain's daughter recognized the significance of her father shaving off his mustache. Another child knew something was wrong when her mum started making Dad's coffee every morning, even though he hadn't been home in weeks. They became little soldiers themselves, guarding secrets they didn't fully understand. A boy at Pearl Harbor carried a note in his pocket for weeks because his father had said, "Don't show this to anyone but the MP at Gate 3 if the sirens go off." He never opened it, just kept checking the folded paper was still there during school bathroom breaks. By Halloween, some bases felt like ghost towns. Houses sat dark even when families were home. The usual costume parade got cancelled due to security concerns. Instead, kids got bags of candy from the officers' club and were told to stay inside. A girl in Virginia peeked through her curtains to see MPs walking paired patrols down usually empty streets, their flashlight beams cutting through the autumn fog. The silence broke eventually. Some fathers came home with new lines on their faces, but wouldn't talk about where they'd been. Others remained just framed photos on mantels, their absence now a permanent fact. A boy at Whiteman AFB remembered his dad returning suddenly one November morning, smelling of jet fuel and stale coffee. The man slept for 18 hours straight, his flight suit in a heap by the bed where he'd dropped it. No one ever explained what had really happened during those weeks. Kids got pieces, a comment about midnight flights over Cuba, a hushed conversation about Russian ships turning back. The details stayed classified, the full story locked away like the extra gas masks still stored in hall closets. Years later, many would realize they'd lived through history without understanding it at the time. The girl from Norfolk saw her father's ship in a documentary about the blockade line. The Colorado boy found the charred remains of documents in the backyard ashes years after his mother died. They'd been children playing soldier in a very real war that never quite happened, carrying orders they couldn't read for a battle they couldn't see. Meanwhile, in schools across America, teachers kept conducting those strange drills where you crouched under your desk. Only now, some kids knew exactly what those exercises were preparing them for. The pencil rolls off your desk when the air raid siren starts. It's the third time this week, but this time your teacher doesn't make the usual joke about testing the speakers. She stands abruptly, knocking her chair over. Under your desks, now. 30 kids scramble down, the sound of shoes scuffing linoleum as you all duck into the cramped space. No one tells you why. A brave boy asks what you're supposed to be hiding from. The teacher's answer is just 3 sharp words. Do it now. Civil defense drills became the new normal overnight. The routine never changed. Drop everything, get under the desk, clasp your hands behind your neck like they taught you in the safety film. But the old drills had been relaxed, almost fun. Now teachers' eyes kept darting to the windows while you crouched. Some kids went quietly. Others kicked each other under the desks like it was recess. A Missouri 6th grade class flat out refused, staging a drill strike until someone explained why they were doing this in peacetime. The principal ended up sending 5 kids home for insubordination. Education department records show these drills tripled in frequency that October, with some schools practicing daily. No one gave teachers scripts for explaining nuclear war to children. Some made up stories about tornado preparedness. Others just repeated safety first, like a mantra. In Oklahoma, a girl took the drill so seriously she hid in a supply closet for hours afterward, convinced the attack was real. They found her at dusk, knees pulled to her chest behind the mop buckets. The preparation rituals got stranger. Your teacher might pass out newspapers for you to fold into fallout hats, though no one explained what fallout was. In California, kids turned these into fashion statements, decorating them with crayons and calling it fallout couture. The teacher didn't stop them, maybe because anything that made the drills seem normal was better than the alternative. You started noticing small changes in the classroom. Extra boxes of tissues near the windows. A trash can full of water in the corner labeled fire control. Drill procedures contradicted everything you knew. They told you to stay inside when every fire drill you'd ever done said go out. The windows had to stay closed for these drills, trapping the smell of peanut butter sandwiches and sweaty kids. Some classrooms taped up black and yellow triangle signs, marking them as shelter areas, though no one said how a thin wooden door would stop whatever was coming. A boy in Illinois asked if they should be covering their eyes too. The teacher just shrugged and said, "Might not hurt." Kids developed their own theories. Some thought the drills were for alien invasions after hearing adults whisper about reds in the sky. Others imagined tornadoes or earthquakes, even if they lived where those never happened. A Florida boy conceived of bad men with sky guns after hearing snippets of news radio. His teacher found him stockpiling milk cartons under his desk for the siege. When she tried taking them away, he bit her hand hard enough to draw blood. Teachers handled it badly because no one trained them. Some became strict drill sergeants, timing how fast you could duck and cover with stopwatches. Others went through the motions with glassy eyes. You noticed which ones flinched when planes flew overhead, which ones kept the civil defense manual open on their desks like a Bible. A Nebraska teacher started bringing her knitting to class. Big, uneven sweaters she never wore, just folded neatly in her bottom drawer. The school counselor later found 17 of them stacked there when she stopped coming to work. The drills created new schoolyard hierarchies. Kids whose parents worked at defense plants became sudden experts, lecturing about megatons and radiation sickness at recess. Military brats showed off their dog tags like they were secret weapons. One boy claimed his father said not to worry because we'll strike first, sending 3 classmates home crying. The playground became a rumor mill where third graders debated blast radii and fallout patterns with the certainty of physicists. Odd behaviors emerged after drills. Some kids refused to sit near windows. A 4th grader in Oregon carried a suitcase for 3 weeks, packed with comic books and a toothbrush, just in case. Teachers saw students flinch at sudden noises that hadn't bothered them before. A book dropping, a chair scraping. The janitor started finding kids hiding in bathroom stalls after drills, their faces pressed against the cool tile walls, like they could absorb safety through porcelain. Physically, the drills made no sense. The film strop showed cartoon turtles surviving blasts by hiding in their shells, but you could feel the flimsy pressboard of your desk when you knocked against it. Grown-ups said you'd be safe if you ducked and covered, but older kids whispered about shadows burned onto walls in Hiroshima. A science-minded boy in New York tested his desk's sturdiness by jumping on it after school. When it broke under his sneakers, he had a full-blown panic attack right there in the empty classroom. Drills bled into other subjects. Math problems featured fallout shelter capacity calculations. Geography lessons focused on maps of Cuba. A girl in Texas remembered her reading group getting assigned On the Beach that October, a novel about nuclear aftermath. She still remembers the passage where a character finds permanent shadows of vaporized children on a school wall. That night, she had her mother check her closet for radiation bats. The drills changed friendships. Kids from families with bomb shelters suddenly became popular. You might get invited to sleepovers at Jenny's house because her dad built a super shelter with bunk beds and a chemical toilet. Other kids got avoided, like the boy whose father protested outside the school with no nuke signs. Teachers didn't know how to handle this, so they pretended not to see the lunchroom segregation between shelter kids and no shelter kids. Nightmares invaded sleep. Parents reported kids waking up screaming about fire from the sky. A 2nd grader in Ohio started sleepwalking to the basement every night, curling up next to the water heater. His parents found him there 6 mornings in a row before giving up and moving his bed downstairs. Teachers noticed more children falling asleep in class, their heads drooping onto arms marked with crude ink drawings of mushroom clouds. Some schools tried to soften the drills with songs. A music teacher in Connecticut had her class sing "My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean" while crouched under desks, turning nuclear preparedness into a bizarre musical. Others read cheerful picture books right after drills, though the tremble in their voices undermined the happy endings. A kindergartner in Maine came home convinced the world would end when "The Big Turtle in the Sky Gets Mad," blending civil defense cartoons with Sunday school stories. The drills affected classroom pets. A 3rd-grade hamster named Mr. Nibbles stopped running on his wheel after daily sirens. The class goldfish died when someone forgot to feed them during back-to-back drill sessions. A rural school's rabbit hutch got repurposed as a practice shelter, with kids taking turns crouching inside while the confused animals hopped around their feet. The biology teacher later found 3 rabbits dead from stress, buried them quietly behind the football field. Administrative hypocrisy showed through. While kids practiced cowering under desks, teachers' lounges stocked up on real survival supplies, cases of bottled water, first aid kits, flashlights with fresh batteries. The principal's office got a new lock installed, with rumors of a secret stash inside. A janitor in Pennsylvania quit after finding the school board's personal evacuation plans tucked behind a boiler, complete with maps to private shelters far from the school they expected children to remain in. The drills became performance. Some teachers graded your form. Points off if you didn't tuck your head completely. Bonus marks if you stayed perfectly still. Parents heard about these grades at teacher conferences, though no one explained what good a B+ in nuclear survival would do when the bombs fell. A perfectionist girl in Maryland practiced nightly at home, making her siblings time her under the dinner table while their parents argued in the next room. Your body remembered the drills even when your mind tried to forget. Years later, certain sounds would trigger the reflex. A car backfiring, a fire alarm during a test, thunder at just the right pitch. A man who'd been a child in '62, confessed to still ducking when jets flew low, long after he understood the drills had been pointless. His co-workers thought it was a nervous tic. He never corrected them. Psychologists would later prove what kids knew instinctively. The unexplained drills caused more trauma than realistic preparation. A generation learned to associate education with sudden fear, their school memories punctuated by the screech of sirens and the feel of dusty floorboards against their cheeks. The children who asked too many questions got labeled troublemakers. The ones who obeyed without question sometimes woke up screaming decades later. The drills didn't stop when the crisis ended. They just became routine, another box for schools to check alongside fire drills and bus safety sessions. But where fire drills ended with the all-clear bell, these exercises left everyone tense for hours. Teachers would dismiss you back to your seats with a distracted wave, then stare out windows at skies that suddenly seemed too big, too open, too full of invisible threats. Kids developed coping mechanisms. Some made games of it, competing to spot the commies in cloud formations. Others drew elaborate escape maps on notebook margins during boring lessons. A creative writing assignment in Michigan produced 17 stories about nuclear war. The horrified teacher sent them all to the principal, who locked them in a filing cabinet marked "Do Not Show Parents." The drills exposed generational divides. Grandparents who'd lived through world wars scoffed at the coddling, saying they'd survived real air raids. Parents alternated between reassurance and grim realism. A Wisconsin girl remembered her grandmother telling her not to worry because we'll all go quick if it happens, while her mother slapped the old woman's arm and hissed, "Not in front of the children." School nurses saw the physical toll. Headache complaints doubled. Stomach aches kept kids in the clinic instead of class. A nurse in New Jersey started keeping spare pants after so many accidents during drills. She'd hand them over without comment. The waistbands adjusted to shaking fingers. The supply closet smelled permanently of bleach and vomit by November. The drills warped time perception. An hour-long shelter-in-place exercise felt endless when you were 10. Your knees pressed into cold linoleum, the only sound 30 kids trying not to breathe too loud. A boy in Washington swore the clock moved backward during drills. His teacher didn't laugh. She just said, "I know," and rubbed her temples like she had the same thought. Aftermath was always awkward. Teachers would try to restart lessons like nothing happened, but the energy had changed. Pencils didn't move as fast. Hands didn't shoot up for questions. A girl in Iowa remembered her teacher reading Charlotte's Web after particularly tense drills, though no one could focus on a dying spider when they'd just been pretending the world might end. Oddly, the drills became nostalgic later. A 1962 yearbook from an Ohio school shows grinning kids peeking out from under desks in the Civil Defense Club photo. The caption reads, "Safety first," with no hint of the nightmares many had that fall. Adults looking back remembered the camaraderie more than the fear. How you'd whisper jokes to the kid crammed under the desk beside you, sharing warmth and nervous laughter in the dark. The TV's glow paints your living room blue at 7 p.m. sharp. Your father won't let you change the channel away from the test pattern, even though Batman usually comes on now. When his face appears, that familiar grin completely gone, you know something's wrong before he speaks. President Kennedy's voice comes through tinny on the console TV, saying words like nuclear strike and quarantine in a tone that makes your mother stop knitting mid-stitch. This wasn't the usual evening broadcast. All three networks carried the same grave expression as Kennedy outlined what he called clear and present danger. Surveys later showed 68% of kids under 12 misunderstood key parts. A Pennsylvania boy thought nuclear meant nuclear bombs you could see coming through the sky like lightning. A Georgia girl believed Cuba was a villain who'd stolen our missiles, picturing some mustachioed bandit loading rockets onto a donkey. Parents tried to translate. Your dad might say Russia put weapons too close to home, gesturing vaguely south. Your mother compared it to a schoolyard bully, though bullies didn't normally have bombs that could erase cities. In Illinois, a boy rushed to hide his comic books after hearing about Soviets. He thought they meant Sue Viet, a villain from his Dick Tracy comics. Child psychologists call this crisis metaphor failure, when adult explanations create wilder fears than the truth. The speech changed house rules instantly. Radio stayed on all night at low volume. Newspapers now appeared with whole sections cut out before you could read them. A DC area girl watched her mother push dresser drawers against the bedroom windows that night, saying it was just in case. When the girl asked, "In case of what?" Swing her mum just turned up the radio and started humming loudly. Kids noticed strange new rituals. Fathers checked locks repeatedly, tested flashlights, even took sudden interest in the basement's structural integrity. A New Jersey boy's dad made him practice identifying world leaders from the newspaper each morning. "So you'll know who to blame," he joked, except his face stayed dead serious. Some families started praying together for the first time since Christmas, the rushed words sounding unfamiliar in their mouths. Military families had it worse. A Navy brat in Norfolk knew something was wrong when his mother made him memorize 3 different phone numbers between dinner and dessert. "Call Aunt Betty if you hear a siren and we're not home," she said, while stirring already cold soup. At an Air Force base in Colorado, officers' kids watched their fathers leave in the middle of the night, duffel bags banging against door frames on the way out. Kennedy's words created more questions than answers. When he said quarantine, a Florida boy thought they were worried about Cuban germs. Another child asked if they should boil their milk like during polio scares. The president's warning that attacks would be met with full retaliatory response just sounded like grown-ups yelling to a first grader in Minnesota. She hid under the coffee table until the speech ended, convinced the shouting voices meant someone was in trouble. Aftermath looked different in every home. Some families sat frozen through the national anthem that followed the broadcast. Others moved frantically. A Boston man started boarding windows while Kennedy was still signing off. In California, a girl's parents ushered her straight to bed afterwards, only for her to wake at 2 a.m., finding them still awake, the TV's glow lighting up their exhausted faces. Schoolyard rumors flourished next morning. A Missouri boy bragged his dad said they'd nuke the commies by Friday. A timid girl from Iowa shared her theory that the bomb was actually a giant metal ball that would roll across America, crushing houses. Teachers couldn't correct them. Many didn't understand the situation themselves. A substitute in Ohio was fired for telling her class, "We're all going to die anyway," during morning attendance. The speech made danger tangible. Before, the drills and whispers had felt like maybe adult overreactions. Now the president himself said missiles could reach the US in minutes. A Chicago girl started counting minutes obsessively. How long to walk home? How long to eat lunch? Realizing for the first time that some things could end mid-bite. Her teacher found her timing how long it took to run to the basement and back during recess. Nightmares changed too. Before, kids dreamed of tornadoes or movie monsters. Now they saw mushroom clouds over their neighborhoods, always right before waking. A Connecticut boy sleepwalked to his parents' closet, curling up among their shoes because he'd heard leather-stopped radiation. His father found him there at dawn, clutching a pair of wingtips like teddy bears. Odd survival strategies emerged. A Kansas girl refused to leave the house without her Girl Scout handbook, convinced the first aid chapter would save her family. Brothers in Michigan started a journal titled Things to Remember After, filling it with maps to their treehouse and lists of favorite foods. The most disturbing entries came weeks later when they'd switched to describing what radiation sickness looked like, copied haltingly from library books. Stores saw panic buying that confused kids. A Charleston boy thought the canned food hoard meant his birthday was cancelled when he saw the stacked peas blocking his presence in the pantry. In Dallas, parents dragged children to hardware stores for duct tape and plastic sheeting, then refused to say why the basement windows needed sealing. One inventive kid in Oregon made fallout dolls from wire and masking tape after seeing her mother seal windows, creating little figures she pretended could absorb the invisible danger. Faith got weaponized. Some churches held 24-hour vigils where kids had to sit still for what felt like eternity. A preacher's daughter in Alabama was told to memorize Psalm 23 for when you're scared, then heard her father practicing it alone late at night, his voice shaking. Catholic kids said extra Hail Marys at school while Protestant children sang, "He's got the whole world." During drills, the lyrics taking on new urgency when belted from under desks. Pets picked up the tension. A family beagle in Vermont started howling along with air raid sirens. Goldfish died when children overfed them, trying to fatten them up for the siege. A boy in Maine carried his parakeet cage to every drill until the teacher banned it. The bird had begun mimicking the civil defense siren perfectly. Little rituals developed. A New York girl rubbed her lucky dime before drills. Twin brothers in Washington invented the secret handshake that would supposedly protect them if done during an attack. One inventive child buried his favorite toys in the backyard so they'd survive, only to dig them up moldy weeks later when the crisis passed. The speech reshaped playtime too. Kids dug trenches instead of sandcastles. Jump rope rhymes switched to 1, 2, 3, 4, we won't live anymore. A creative kindergartner modified Duck Duck Goose to Duck Duck Nuke, making classmates pretend to collapse when tagged. Teachers mostly let it go. At least they weren't crying. Oddly, some kids found relief in the speech. The vague dread now had a name and a face on TV. A military brat in California realized why her father hadn't been home in weeks. An anxious boy in Philadelphia stopped wetting the bed once he knew what exactly he should fear. Psychologists call this the naming effect. Children often handle known terrors better than imagined ones. The timing made it worse. Normally, a 7 p.m. broadcast meant dinners got delayed. That night, no one cared about pot roast cooling on plates. A Seattle girl's perfect attendance record broke when her parents kept her home next day to help organize the basement. What they organized was never specified, but she spent hours handing her father tools while he reinforced the ceiling joists. Every tick of the clock got attention now. Kennedy said the crisis could unfold with little or no warning. A Virginia boy's father started wearing his watch to bed. Teachers let students stare out windows more, understanding that for once, the kids weren't daydreaming. They were scanning the horizon like everyone else. Night workers' children had it hardest. Nurses' kids came to school exhausted from sleeping in hospital break rooms during double shifts. A trucker's daughter in Indiana went days without seeing her father, finding only cryptic notes about extra routes down south. When he finally came home, his uniform smelled of sweat and something sharp she later recognized as gun oil. Radio became the background noise of fear. Static hiss replaced bedtime stories as parents tuned to news stations at low volume. A New Hampshire girl developed a stutter after weeks of hearing bulletins cut into her favorite programs. Her teacher patiently waited out the pauses until she could finish sentences about duck migrations or spelling tests. Some things didn't change. Homework still got assigned, though fewer kids did it. Report cards still came home, though parents barely glanced at the grades. A Nebraska boy's straight A streak ended when he spent October writing letters to his deployed uncle instead of book reports. His teacher gave him a B+ with "Family First" written in the margin. Kennedy's speech should have clarified things. Instead, it made the abstract terrifyingly specific, while keeping the details opaque. You knew missiles were bad, but not what they looked like in flight. The word radiation floated around with no explanation beyond "it gets in your bones." A science-minded boy in Maryland imagined his skeleton glowing in the dark and took to sleeping with a flashlight. Now every sunset got scrutinized. Was the red hue normal, or some sign of distant explosions? Kids who'd never noticed cloud formations now pointed nervously at every contrail. A Florida girl refused to go outside after 3 p.m., convinced the missiles would come at dusk when people are tired from watching all day. The nation held its breath, and children learned to breathe shallowly too. A Connecticut boy's asthma attacks spiked that month. A Chicago girl developed nervous hiccups whenever jets flew overhead. Doctors made house calls for phantom illnesses, leaving tonics that mostly just stained tongues purple without easing the real symptoms. Parents' attempts to protect often backfired. A well-meaning father in Ohio told his son the news was just a grown-up weather report, leading to years of the boy fearing thunderstorms as nuclear war. Another tried explaining radiation with a flashlight under blankets. The demonstration left his daughter unable to sleep unless fully clothed in case she needed to flee at night. The speech ended, but the tension didn't. If anything, Kennedy made it clear this was just beginning. As the national anthem played over test patterns again, a generation of children went to bed knowing the rules had changed. Morning would come with new routines, extra cans in the pantry, basement inventories, fathers gone before dawn, but no one would explain why. You drifted off to sleep that night with the president's words echoing, unable to articulate the new weight in your chest, but certain of one thing: the adults were just as scared as you were. The milkman leaves 3 extra bottles on the stoop instead of 2. You watch through the kitchen window as he checks his clipboard twice before walking away, his usual whistle replaced by quick glances at the sky. Down the street, Mrs. Reynolds checks her mail wearing yellow rubber gloves now, peeling open envelopes like they might bite. Your father stands by the bedroom window longer than usual after tucking you in, his silhouette blocking part of the moon as he stares east. Routines warped under the pressure of those 13 days. Breakfast looked normal, except your mother now scrubbed each apple with baking soda before letting you eat it. An Oregon boy started washing his hands raw after watching his mother disinfect groceries with vinegar. Bath time came earlier, so you'd be ready if something happens, though no one said what that something might be. The fridge stayed packed weirdly full, with canned goods appearing under your bed, where stuffed animals used to live. Children noticed the small changes adults thought they'd miss. A Michigan girl began collecting mercury dimes in a mason jar she called her Fallout Fund, convinced their silver content would protect her from radiation. Another child drew pictures of his house with a giant glass dome over it, telling his teacher this would appear when the bad thing comes. Diaries from the period show kids developing odd rituals, checking window locks exactly 14 times before bed, or refusing to wear certain clothes that wouldn't last in the shelter. Parents' behaviors became scripts to follow without understanding. A carpenter's son in Vermont started measuring doors obsessively after seeing his father test if they'd seal properly. A bank teller's daughter lined up her dolls by height near the basement stairs every night, mimicking her mother's inventory of canned goods. Psychologists later called this crisis mimicry. Children copying anxious behaviors like they were games, unaware of the real stakes. The only rule seemed to be, if adults are doing it nervously, you should too. Meals took on strange significance. Your mother served the same pork and beans 3 nights in a row to test our emergency meals. A boy in Indiana got scolded for wasting food when he didn't finish his peas. People in bomb shelters would kill for these, his father said, making the threat tangible for the first time. Another child's parents made them practice eating by candlelight once a week, blowing the flame out after exactly 10 minutes to conserve for the real emergency. Odd items appeared in homes overnight. Basements got steel drums of water with drinking only painted on the sides. Closets held boxes of dusty gas masks from army surplus stores. A girl in Connecticut found her father's golf bag stuffed with road flares and iodine tablets instead of clubs. The family first aid kit grew 3 sizes, now including mysterious vials and a pamphlet about radiation burns no one would explain. Nighttime routines stretched longer. Bedtime stories got replaced by your father showing you how to turn off the gas line in case Mom and I aren't home. A Pennsylvania girl's mother made her practice dressing in the dark with evacuation clothes, laid out in a specific order. Underwear closest to the bed, shoes by the door. Another child's parents timed how fast he could get from his bed to the basement shelter. Their stopwatch clicks measuring survival odds he didn't fully grasp. Parents developed tells. Your mother hummed Que sera, sera while sealing windows with tape, the tune too cheerful for her shaking hands. Fathers, who normally read the paper at breakfast, now spread maps on the table, measuring distances to relatives' homes with pieces of string. A pilot's daughter in Florida knew something was wrong when her dad started kissing her forehead 3 times instead of once before school. Always 2 quick pecks, then a long 3rd one while he inhaled sharply through his nose. Schools amplified the rituals. A teacher in Ohio had students practice drinking from the classroom sink in case the water fountains get contaminated. Another made kids file past her desk each morning so she could check their pockets. No one said for what, but you knew it was for notes about bomb shelters or parent deployments. Recess turned into drills within drills, with jump ropes becoming radiation detectors and hopscotch squares labeled safe zones. Holiday plans evaporated. A boy's birthday party got moved to the basement, the cake decorated with frosting mushrooms that didn't look like any mushrooms he knew. Halloween was postponed for safety, though some parents let kids trick or treat early while the sun was up. A girl in Maine wore her princess costume to the basement during an air raid drill, the tulle skirt catching on the concrete steps as she crouched next to canned vegetables. Playtime mirrored the crisis. Kids dug trenches in sandboxes, calling them personnel shelters. A group in Seattle played quarantine, locking friends in tree houses until they answered trivia about Cuba. Another child turned their wagon into a supply transport, hauling rocks wrapped in tinfoil across the yard while muttering about rations. Adults mostly let it happen. At least the games meant the kids were processing things, even if all wrong. Animals sensed the shift. A family collie in Iowa started herding children toward the basement at odd hours. The class hamster stopped running on its wheel after too many drill sirens. A boy's goldfish died when he overfed it, having heard his parents say, "Stock up while you can." His father flushed it without comment, then bought 3 replacements the next day. Church became another kind of drill. Families who attended sporadically now sat in pews every Sunday, the minister's sermons heavy on end times imagery. A girl in Alabama had to memorize Psalm 91. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day, though no one explained what arrows had to do with missiles. Another child collected pocket Bibles from the church foyer, stashing them around the house like they were first aid kits for the soul. The rituals crossed economic lines. Wealthy families built concrete shelters with Geiger counters. Poor ones marked basements with yellow paint and hoped for the best. A sharecropper's daughter in Mississippi remembered her father nailing old mattresses to the ceiling to catch fallout, while a banker's son in New York watched workmen install a steel door where his playroom used to be. The details differed, but the fear translated the same in any language. News consumption became obsessive. Radio stayed on at volumes just too low for kids to hear clearly. TV antennas got adjusted constantly, even during shows. A boy in California drew pictures of newscasters based on the voices from his parents' bedroom radio, all of them frowning, some with missiles for arms. Another child thought Walter Cronkite lived in their console TV, waiting to warn them when it happened. Personal habits warped. A girl in Vermont refused to wear anything but red, white, and blue, so they'll know I'm American. A boy in Texas carried his baseball bat everywhere, convinced he could knock bombs back to Russia. Another child wrote his name and address on his forearm each morning, having heard this would help identify him after. His teacher found out and started checking wrists at roll call, saying nothing when she saw the ink. Some rituals turned dark. A teenager in Chicago built model planes only to set them on fire in the alley. 2 brothers in Kansas buried their toys in the backyard to save them, digging them up weeks later to find the plastic soldiers melted together. A sensitive girl started chewing her hair until she had a bald spot, her stomach too upset to keep food down. The school nurse called it nerves and sent her back to class with a mint. The waiting became its own phenomenon. Clocks ticked louder. Sunsets got scrutinized for odd colors. A boy in Washington timed how long it took to count to 60, convinced missiles would arrive before he finished. His sister tied strings around her fingers as reminders. Red for don't drink the water, blue for close the curtains quick. Neither knew why these rules mattered, only that their parents had muttered them while listening to the radio. Oddly, some found comfort in the routines. The canned food towers meant someone was preparing. The locked windows proved dangers could be kept out. A girl in Rhode Island slept better after her father installed the shelter sign, figuring adults must have a plan if they took time to paint the letters so neatly. Another child liked the strict new chore rotation. If the world was ending, at least someone still cared if he made his bed. Teachers noticed the coping mechanisms. A Hawaiian educator found students building tsunami walls from textbooks during drills. A Missouri instructor caught kids trading civil defense pamphlets like baseball cards. Another let her class turn a storage closet into a shelter corner, stocked with board games and flashlight batteries, knowing the illusion of control soothed them more than facts could. The 13 days ended, but the habits lingered. Mothers kept buying extra canned peaches long after the crisis passed. Fathers still paused at windows, their eyes searching the horizon out of reflex. Children who'd memorized emergency routes now walked them in their sleep. That knife-edge tension had vanished, but its imprint remained, in the way you'd count exits in new rooms, or how the sound of a low-flying plane could still make your hands shake years later, even when you told yourself the danger was over. Then one ordinary morning, the radio played music again. Newspapers reappeared on kitchen tables with crossword puzzles intact. Your father whistled while making coffee, and when you asked why everyone seemed happier, he just ruffled your hair and said something about the Russians backing down. The signs came down, the shelters gathered dust, and the slow work of forgetting began, though no one who lived through those days ever really could. The school drills continued, but now, when you crouched under your desk, you finally understood what you'd been hiding from all along. The knowledge settled heavy in your stomach, like you'd swallowed one of those mercury dimes and could feel it sitting there cold and dead. You wake up to the smell of bacon for the first time in weeks. The radio in the kitchen is playing Elvis instead of news bulletins. Your father whistles while shaving, the sound carrying down the hallway like it's any ordinary Tuesday. No one sits you down to explain that the crisis is over. They just stop acting like the world might end before dinner. The change happens overnight, but feels like it should have fanfare. A New Jersey boy thought the Russians were coming to his school to personally apologize after hearing about Khrushchev backing down. His teacher found him waiting by the flagpole for Soviet officials who never arrived. In Iowa, a girl decided the missiles must have been imaginary all along, like a bad dream everyone had at the same time. Child development studies show this kind of magical thinking is common when adults fail to provide explanations. Kids fill the gaps with whatever makes sense to them. Some families celebrate quietly. Your neighbor burns his civil defense manuals in the barbecue grill. The twins down the street get their confiscated slingshots back. But other households keep up precautions like nothing changed. A Florida boy refused to leave his shelter corner, a nook under the basement stairs he'd lined with blankets, for 3 months after the crisis ended. His parents eventually had to remove the furniture to get him to sleep in his bed again. School feels different too. The principal makes announcements without glancing at the ceiling first. Teachers leave classroom doors open during air raid drills instead of checking the seals. But the routines you've learned don't just vanish. Desks still have scratch marks from kids gripping them too tight during drills. The supply closet holds stacks of unused mimeographed survival instructions that nobody bothers to throw away. Parents' behaviors leave whiplash. One day, your mom is boiling drinking water just in case. The next, she's signing you up for piano lessons like nothing happened. A girl in Ohio watched her father take down the basement shelter sign, only to re-hang it twice before leaving it leaning against the trash cans. The contradictions mess with your sense of danger. If adults can't decide whether to relax, how are you supposed to know when it's safe? Teachers notice the aftermath before anyone talks about it. Your second-grade teacher starts carrying tissues for kids who burst into tears during fire drills. The school nurse's office stocks extra pants after so many accidents during air raid practices. Older kids regress. 5th graders suck their thumbs during movies. 6th graders wet the bed on sleepovers. No one comments on it except to say, "It's been a tough autumn," in that tight-lipped way adults have when they mean more than they're saying. The neighborhood routines shift awkwardly. Mrs. Henderson stops wearing gloves to get the mail, but still boils her letters in a pot on the stove. The milkman delivers the usual 2 bottles again, but you notice he keeps looking at the sky like old habits die hard. Down the street, someone finally takes down their fallout shelter sign, leaving a yellow stain on the concrete where the sun didn't bleach the wall. Playtime takes weeks to return to normal. Kids dig fewer trenches in the sandbox. The jump rope rhymes gradually lose their nuclear references. But some things stick. A group in Seattle keeps playing Quarantine with their treehouse well into December. When the teacher asks why, they just say it's their special game now. The school counselor calls it working through trauma, but mostly leaves them to it. Church sermons lighten up slowly. The pastor stops talking about Armageddon every Sunday, though the hymns stay somber for months. A girl in Alabama finally gets to hear the rest of Psalm 23, the part about green pastures instead of just the valley of the shadow of death. Her mother cries quietly in the pew when they sing, "This is my Father's world." For the first time since September, military families adjust in their own ways. A Navy pilot comes home with his uniform smelling of salt and jet fuel, hugging his kids too tight at the airport. His daughter notices he still sleeps with his shoes by the bed for weeks afterward. At the commissary, Officers' wives stop stocking up on powdered milk, but keep buying extra coffee like they're expecting more late nights. Some kids obsess over leftovers from the crisis. A boy in Vermont makes his parents keep eating canned peaches every Thursday because that's when they did their supply tests. Another child keeps wearing the same red sweater for weeks, convinced it's his lucky radiation shirt. Teachers find drawings of mushroom clouds mixed in with winter holiday art projects, but nobody throws them away. They just stack them in the back of the classroom closet. News consumption drops, but doesn't stop. Your father still listens to the radio at dinner, just quieter. Newspapers return to the coffee table, though they're missing fewer sections now. A girl in California starts crying every time the TV test pattern comes on, so her parents move the set to the basement. They don't get rid of it, just like they don't empty the emergency water drums. Some precautions become habit. The shelter signs linger like ghosts around town. Some get painted over quickly. Others fade slowly in the sun, the black triangles turning grey before finally peeling off years later. You notice them every time you walk to school, these scars no one talks about. A boy in Massachusetts starts counting them on his way home, giving them names like Mr. Yellow Sign and the Quiet House. Nightmares don't stop just because the news does. You still dream of sirens sometimes, waking up to check the clock for no reason you can explain. A girl in Pennsylvania wets the bed whenever planes fly too low over her house. Her pediatrician calls it nerves and prescribes extra milk at bedtime, which helps about as much as you'd expect. Odd behaviors persist among adults too. Your father continues taping the windows during thunderstorms months after the crisis, insisting it's just in case of tornadoes. The grocery store manager still shows up at 4 a.m. to check deliveries, even though the panic buying ended. Little rituals cement into routine without anyone deciding they should. You don't realize until years later that your mother always kept 6 months' worth of canned goods until the day she died. The geopolitical details never really get explained to kids. You overhear snippets about Soviet ships turning back and negotiations through back channels, but no one connects these to the fear you lived with for those 13 days. A perceptive boy in Maryland sorts it out from library books about Cuba, but most kids just file it away as another adult mystery like taxes or the oil spot under the car. Grown-ups seem relieved, but somehow smaller afterward. The president saved the world, but also proved how close it came to ending. A girl in Illinois notices her parents don't talk about Kennedy with the same awe they had before. Now there's something shaky in their voices when his picture comes on TV. The unspoken lesson sticks. Even presidents get scared. Holidays that year feel loaded. Thanksgiving features arguments about being grateful disguised as prayers. Christmas presents include suspiciously practical gifts, extra wool socks, a camping first aid kit that looks well stocked for urban survival. One family's tree gets decorated with old civil defense pamphlets folded into ornaments, the yellow and black triangles clashing with the tinsel. Eventually, the rhythms of ordinary life take over. Homework assignments get longer. The weather turns cold enough that snowball fights replace nuclear war games in the schoolyard. But you notice which kids still look at the sky first when sirens sound, who hesitates before opening the basement door. The drills keep happening at school, only now they're just exercises again, annoyances to endure rather than warnings of impending doom. Years later, looking back, you'll realize how little you understood at the time, how close the world came to catastrophe while you worried about spelling tests and Little League. But in the moment, the lasting feeling isn't relief. It's the queasy understanding that the adults didn't have everything under control after all. That sometimes they're just as scared as you are, pretending they know what to do when really they're making it up as they go along. The canned goods stay in the basement. The radio stays tuned to the news station, just quieter. And when you tuck your own children into bed years later, you'll hesitate before saying everything's going to be okay, because you remember too well how quickly that can stop being true. The crisis ends, but the knowing doesn't. You've seen behind the curtain now, and no amount of normalcy can make you forget what's lurking there. You still check the ceiling when planes fly too low. Your pantry holds more canned soup than any reasonable person needs. Your grandchildren ask why you save every plastic container that comes through the house, and you just say old habits while stacking them neatly under the sink. The truth is, October 1962 never really ended for you. It just stretched across decades in ways you can't explain to people who weren't there. That fall left marks that didn't fade. A retired teacher in Ohio still lines her shoes up by the door in perfect, quick shelter formation. A dentist in Florida keeps his office stocked like a 1962 fallout bunker. Extra batteries in every drawer. Bottled water stacked behind the X-ray machine. When patients comment, he jokes about hurricane season, but the joke falls flat in December. Psychologists call it crisis childhood syndrome. Not an official diagnosis, just a name for the way some of you still flinch when newscasters use certain tones of voice. The behaviors make perfect sense when you trace them back. That dentist, his father had been at Pearl Harbor. The teacher, she'd spent 3 nights straight in a school basement during the crisis when her parents didn't come get her. Trauma breeds preparation, breeds compulsion. A lawyer in Chicago still tests all the exits in restaurants before sitting down. She doesn't think about it anymore, just does it automatically while scanning the menu. Left hall leads to kitchen, right goes to alley, front door is jammed when crowded. Military families had it worse. A Navy brat who grew up near Norfolk still unpacks within hours of arriving anywhere. Hotels, vacation rentals, even hospital rooms. His wife calls it ridiculous. He calls it reflex. As a kid, he'd watched his father pack for deployments in under 10 minutes. So now he keeps his shaving kit ready to grab at all times. His sock drawer looks like a quartermaster's inventory. Identical pairs rolled tight and arranged by color. The system would seem obsessive if you didn't know about the month he'd spent waiting to hear if his dad's ship had been hit during the blockade. Some coping mechanisms turn dark. A contractor in Arizona makes shelters for a living. Not the flimsy backyard bunkers, but proper concrete layers with air filtration and radiation lining. He won't talk about his childhood except to say his mother used to cry herself to sleep holding a photo of his father, who'd been on a reconnaissance flight over Cuba. The shelters all have 2 exits, food for 5 years, and no windows. His waiting list stretches 3 years long. The habits seep into parenting without meaning to. A grandmother in Texas teaches her grandkids shelter games without realizing their origin. They think finding the safest room in any building is hilarious, competing to point out basement corners farthest from windows. She doesn't tell them how she learned this, just watches them play with something tight in her chest. Their mother, her daughter, finally asked last Christmas why the games always involved counting supplies. The answer made the whole family quiet for the rest of dinner. Businesses cater to the lingering fear. A company in Oregon sells $50,000 luxury shelters disguised as garden sheds. The owner was 9 during the crisis, spent 2 days locked in a school gymnasium when his bus couldn't get through military checkpoints. Now he installs panic rooms with fiber internet and wine coolers, telling clients it's better to have it and not need it. They nod like he's joking while writing checks with shaky hands. The symptoms don't match typical trauma responses. Psychologists note this generation tends toward hypervigilance rather than avoidance. You don't shy away from crisis news. You study it, track patterns, make mental notes. A stockbroker who was 12 in '62 can tell you which cities would be hit first in a modern attack based on 1960s targeting maps. His co-workers think it's a weird hobby. He knows it's why his family survived Katrina with 3 days head start on evacuation. Medical records show odd clusters. Gastroenterologists near military bases report higher rates of stress ulcers in this age group. Dentists note unusual tooth grinding patterns. A study of DC area residents found those who were children during the crisis wake more often at night to check doors and windows. None of this makes the news. Just doctors comparing notes about patients who apologize for overreacting, while their blood pressure spikes during routine physicals. The political effects are subtle but real. This generation votes differently on disaster preparedness bills. They're overrepresented in emergency management careers. A senator who was 8 years old in 1962 slipped an amendment into a budget bill requiring all schools to have potassium iodide stockpiles. When questioned, he told stories about crouching under his desk, wondering if the pill his teacher clutched was the good kind that would make dying painless. Cultural nostalgia skips over the fear. Oldies stations play 1962 hits without mentioning how many kids first heard them between civil defense bulletins. A museum exhibit about Cold War toys displays miniature fallout shelters without explaining why some children broke them, trying to see if the tiny doors actually sealed. The decade gets remembered for rock and roll and tail fins, not for the teacher who cried while demonstrating how to tape windows, or the milkman who delivered extra bottles just in case. Unwanted expertise lingers. You can probably still sketch a basic fallout shelter from memory. The Geiger counter seen in movies makes you shake your head at the inaccuracies. When young co-workers joke about nuclear war, you don't laugh because you remember your mother burning documents in the backyard and saying, "If we live through this," like it was a real possibility. Some try to break the patterns. A psychologist in Denver specializes in crisis unpacking for this demographic. Her waiting room has no magazines. Patients might interpret headlines as warnings. Instead, there are coloring books and wooden blocks. She says the work isn't about forgetting 1962, but about teaching the body it's okay to stop bracing for impact after 60 years. Progress gets measured in small steps. Clients who can watch disaster movies without pacing, who don't immediately restock pantries after minor earthquakes. The markers sneak up when you least expect. A perfectly normal Tuesday gets derailed by a siren test. A grandchild's question about olden days takes you back to canned peaches and classroom drills. The smell of mimeograph ink at a school reunion makes your hands shake, though you laugh it off as too much coffee. And the dreams don't stop. Not nightmares exactly, just vivid replays of moments you didn't realize you'd memorized. Your father measuring the basement while humming off key. Your mother counting soup cans over and over. The way sunlight came through the classroom windows during duck and cover drills. Dust motes swirling where you'd been told to keep your eyes locked until the all-clear bell. You pass some things on without meaning to. Your kids know how to seal windows with tape from helping with winter drafts. They think you're frugal for saving jars and aluminum foil. not realizing you're following civil defense instructions you heard once on the radio. The true legacy isn't in the big stories that get told at reunions, but in these tiny, unthinking repetitions of survival habits you can't seem to unlearn. The oddest part? Much of what you prepared for never happened. The basement shelters gathered dust. The iodine pills expired unused. Yet the real threats that did come, recessions, pandemics, personal tragedies, found you oddly ready. Those 13 days taught you to always check exits, keep supplies, expect the worst while hoping for better. It wasn't healthy, but it kept you alive through everything that followed. Now new crises emerge, and you watch younger people panic while feeling strangely calm. You've been waiting for the world to end since 3rd grade. The dread never left. You just got better at carrying it. When wildfires force evacuations or wars flare up, your hands stay steady as you methodically pack the car. The grandchildren call you unflappable. They don't realize you're still that kid crouched under a desk, waiting for the bell to ring. The declassified documents hit like a gut punch decades later. Soviet field commanders in Cuba had authority to launch tactical nukes without checking with Moscow. One itchy trigger finger could have ended everything. That detail alone changes how you see those 13 days. The adults weren't just scared. They were barely in control of their own forces. October 27th, 1962. A Soviet submarine designated B-59 drifts somewhere beneath the Caribbean, its crew exhausted after days of evading American warships. The air conditioning failed weeks ago. Carbon dioxide levels climb. Then the depth charges start exploding. US Navy destroyers trying to force them to surface. Captain Valentin Savitsky, sweating through his uniform, believes nuclear war has already begun. He orders the torpedo crew to prepare their nuclear weapon, a 15-kiloton payload that could vaporize an aircraft carrier. The sub's political officer approves the launch. Only one man stands between that decision and catastrophe: Vasily Arkhipov, the flotilla commander. He refuses to authorize. No one will know his name for decades. The torpedo stays in its tube. Historians now put the odds of nuclear exchange during the crisis at 1 in 4. Some argue it was closer to 50-50. The children hiding under desks weren't being paranoid. Their nightmares were statistically plausible. You think about all the close calls that never made the news. Radar operators in Moorestown, New Jersey, mistake a flock of geese for incoming missiles, triggering DEFCON 2 alerts. An errant test tape plays over civilian air raid sirens in Washington. A U-2 spy plane accidentally veers into Soviet airspace over Siberia, just as tensions peak. Each mistake could have been the spark. The football nuclear briefcase exists because of those 13 days. Before the crisis, America's nuclear launch protocols relied on scrambled phone calls and fragmented chains of command. Kennedy learned the hard way that nearly losing Florida to miscommunication required a better system. The idea that someone always had a briefcase of launch codes near the president started here. It's cold comfort knowing the failsafe was invented because we almost failed. Cuba held more nukes than anyone told the public. Soviet forces had already moved 158 warheads onto the island before the blockade began. At least 95 were operational. Tactical nukes that could have wiped out an invasion force before Washington knew the shooting started. Castro later admitted he would have ordered their use even if it meant Cuba's destruction. That detail erases any comforting fantasies about cooler heads prevailing. Some leaders were fully prepared to burn everything down. The missiles in Turkey get overshadowed in most retellings. 15 Jupiter missiles stationed near Izmir, capable of hitting Moscow with 1.4 megaton warheads. Kennedy publicly refused to remove them as part of any deal, but the secret agreement with Khrushchev included their dismantling. The political theatre mattered more than the strategic value. Those obsolete missiles were already scheduled for removal, but maintaining appearances nearly ended the world. Communication breakdowns happened hourly. Soviet submarines couldn't contact Moscow for days at a time. The US military's command structure fragmented under stress, with local commanders interpreting orders through their own panic. The infamous hotline between Washington and Moscow, it didn't exist yet. Diplomats relied on convoluted back channels, including an ABC News correspondent, who became an accidental intermediary. The system was held together with chewing gum and prayers. You can measure the fear by what changed afterward. That hotline got installed within months. 2 teletype machines linking the Kremlin and Pentagon, tested hourly to prevent another silence. The limited test ban treaty followed within a year. Even hawks admitted we'd peered over the edge and didn't like the view. Congressional hearings later revealed hundreds of previously classified near misses, each one capable of kicking off the domino effect. The children's terror turns out to have been rational. Those duck and cover drills weren't naive. They reflected a brutal truth about survivability in nuclear war. People closer to blast zones would indeed fare better under desks than standing tall. The iodine tablets might have actually helped with fallout. The adults didn't tell kids the full truth, because the full truth was unbearable. They genuinely didn't know if anyone could survive what might come next. The Soviet perspective makes it worse. Recently opened archives show how close Khrushchev came to losing control of his own military. Hardliners wanted to call Kennedy's bluff. Local commanders in Cuba prepared nuclear launch sites without explicit orders. The same factionalism that would eventually unravel the USSR nearly detonated the Cold War at its hottest moment. This wasn't 2 chess masters playing carefully. It was 2 men trying to rein in their own unstable systems. American military readiness wasn't better. SAC bombers circled constantly with live nukes, some of which suffered maintenance issues that could have caused accidental detonations. A B-52 crash in North Carolina later revealed that one of its Mark 39 hydrogen bombs came alarmingly close to exploding on impact. The fail-safes weren't as fail-proof as advertised. You wonder how many other close calls remain classified. Nuclear winter predictions hadn't entered public consciousness yet, but the scientists knew. Classified studies in 1962 estimated even a limited exchange could blanket the Northern Hemisphere in radioactive dust for years. Agricultural collapse, mass starvation. The children practicing fallout drills were being prepped for an apocalypse no one would survive, but no one admitted that part aloud. The drills focused on surviving the blast because admitting the aftermath was unsurvivable would have broken the national psyche. The submarine incident wasn't unique. Soviet documents reveal at least 3 other cases where local commanders considered unauthorized launches before being reined in. The US had its own version. A nuclear-armed fighter pilot who took off against orders during the crisis, only to be intercepted and forced to land. The systems had more holes than anyone wanted to admit. 1 disobedient sergeant here, 1 jumpy radar operator there. That's all it would have taken. The aftermath bred strange ironies. Some of the same men who brought us to the brink became passionate arms control advocates. McNamara spent decades trying to walk back his own hawkishness. Khrushchev got deposed in part for losing the standoff, even though his compromise saved millions of lives. The children who lived through it developed habits their own kids can't comprehend. Like why grandma freaks out when the news plays archive footage of Kennedy. You think about all the near misses that didn't involve missiles. A NATO exercise called Sky Shield ran during the crisis, with hundreds of American and Canadian fighters scrambling to intercept mock Soviet bombers. Radars lit up with unidentified blips, real ones this time. For 90 minutes, commanders debated whether this was the real thing before stand-down orders finally came. The children doing duck and cover that day had no idea how close the drill came to being real. What sticks in your throat isn't just how close we came. It's how many people had to get lucky. Arkhipov saying no. The geese flying at just the right angle to fool radar. Castro not getting a direct line to Soviet missile crews. Kennedy ignoring his Joint Chiefs who wanted airstrikes. Khrushchev picking a diplomatic exit over saving face. The dice kept landing our way, but the house always wins eventually. The children sensed that. They saw the adults' hands shaking when they thought no one was looking. Those kids are grandparents now, and the world's still here. Not because we fixed the system, but because we've been rolling sixes since 1962. The same flaws exist today. Faulty early warning systems, hair trigger alerts, leaders who might not back down. We just got better at hiding it from the children. Now it's your turn to sit by the radio, listening for whatever comes next, hoping the luck holds out one more time. Those 13 days in October taught kids something no child should know, that the world hangs by a thread, and sometimes the adults don't have answers. 60 years later, those children still check the sky when planes fly low. Their story isn't just about missiles. It's about how fear seeps into young minds when the people they trust can't hide their own terror. If you lived through this, tell your story below. And if you're just learning this history now, remember, the past isn't just dates in a textbook. It's canned peaches in dark basements and whispered conversations that stopped when you walked in. Thank you for coming on this journey with me tonight. If you enjoyed this story, I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, and maybe even comment on other places you would like to visit, and I'll try and make it happen. May sound sleep and beautiful dreams come to you tonight, my friend. You deserve it.